we get to the elect here, let me get... All right, in Matthew 24:31, somebody else read that for me here. We're going to have to stop here in just a few minutes.
And he will send forth his angels with a great trumpet, and they will gather together his elect from the four winds, from one end of the sky to the other.
Okay, and he will send forth his angels.
That's NASB.
Right, and thank you very much. Now, there are some dispensationalists who will take, at this point, what we might call a wooden literalism that teach that angels will pick up Jews from around the world and bring them to Jerusalem. In fact, in one dispensational study Bible, it reads, "At the intervention of Christ from heaven, the elect will be gathered by the angels from the ends of the earth." I don't know if anyone ever read Dwight Pentecost's book on end times, but he says, during the tribulation, Israel will be scattered out of the land by military invasions. The Israelites will flee and find refuge among Gentile nations, but supernaturally God will bring people back to the land through the instrumentality of angels, which will be the final restoration anticipated in the Old Testament. Now, the Greek word angels, again, is one of those words that you have to understand by context how it's translated. Angel certainly is angel, but the word most literally can be translated messenger. Messenger. Do you ever read in the book of the Revelation, for example, it will say when he's writing to the churches, to the angel at the church of Ephesus, to the angel at the church of... Now the question becomes, is he talking to the angel that's spiritually speaking, or is he talking to the messenger? And angelos, if I want to send you a message, Brad, and I was writing it in Greek, and that was the phrase, I want to send Brad a message, I would use the word angelos. So if you translated it, you would say, Pastor wants to send me an angel. Well, no, I'm not sending you an angel, I'm sending you a message. This is the hard part of the Greek language, is that you've got to understand a lot of contexts in order to make those particular translations. So God's prophets, messengers, ministers, both in the Old and the New Testament, at times are described as angels, all right? Even dispensationalists will recognize this at times because God's angels can and are indeed divine messengers. In the Septuagint, the Greek word angelos is translated numerous times as messenger. For example, in 2 Chronicles 26:15, it says, "And the Lord, the God of their fathers, sent word to them again and again by his messengers, because he had compassion on his people and on his dwelling place." Well, that word in the Septuagint, which is the Greek version of the Hebrew Bible, they use the term angelos, angel. All right? Another version, or in verse 16, they mock the messengers of God, which is talking about the prophets, but again in the Septuagint they use the word angelos. And so you need to keep that in mind. Jesus sent messengers ahead of him, Luke said in chapter 9, verse 32. It's the word angeloi. So these are some of the challenging translation issues we find when we're dealing with these things. So these messengers in Matthew 24:31 called together God's people from the four winds, a reference to the four corners of the earth, and from one end of the sky to the other. This is a reference to the entire horizon of the world. We should not be pressed to interpret four winds necessarily in a scientific fashion, because four winds suggest a square world, or does the four corners of the earth suggest somehow the world is square? Of course not. But the Bible, speaking in really theological terms, depicts the earth as a house. Heaven is described in a similar fashion. None of this language suggests that the earth is flat or a cube, something that literalism would demand. But the Bible alludes to the earth's circularity in Isaiah 40:22, which, by the way, remember that passage, Isaiah 40:22, because if people ever are saying, there is a time you Christians believe the world was flat. Listen, the Bible always taught the circularity of the earth, Isaiah 40:22, all right? So keep that.
It says he sits above the circle of the earth.
Yeah, it is he who sits above the circle of the earth. Exactly. And that was long before they understood these things. So, again.
Dumb ancient people.
Yeah, they were stupid. All right, so, the great judgment of verse 31, the postmillennialists would believe is the call of the gospel. It's referring to Numbers 10, where the silver trumpets were made to call the people together for worship and to set them on their march. It also alludes to the year of Jubilee, the year when the world reverts to its original owners, the year when Satan is dispossessed and Christ reclaims the world. That is what is known as the acceptable time or the acceptable year of the Lord. So the gospel began to go out to the world at Pentecost, but throughout the book of Acts, the gospel went to the Jew first, Paul said. And with the destruction of Jerusalem, the gospel went out to the Gentiles in new fullness, and with the expectation that the nations or the Gentiles would be discipled. That was a part of the Great Commission. So Matthew 24:31 draws on Old Testament imagery, the trumpet, the four winds, from one end of the sky to the other. The trumpet is the symbolic feature of a great work to commence the great gathering of God's people into one new spiritual nation. In fact, the word for gather is the Greek word synagogue. It would be where we get synagogue. Synagogue, I guess is how it would be pronounced. Judaism, in its rejection of Christ, had become a synagogue of Satan in Revelation 2:9. The true synagogue of God, the church, is made up of believing Jews and Gentiles. The elect are scattered around the world and from the four winds, from one end of the sky to the other. God heralds the great ingathering of his elect from every tribe, tongue, and nation by sending his gospel messengers into the world. History attests to this fact that Jesus' elect have been and even now are being gathered together as a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people for God's own possession. All right? And so, again, they would just disagree that once the judgment took place with regards to AD 70 in Jerusalem, that this particular verse references these gospel messengers going forth and beginning to gather his church together and realize what's the postmillennialist view as far as trajectory?
It's ever prevailing.
It's ever prevailing. And so you have to get their lenses on when you see this, that while there was judgment concerning the temple, that the trajectory from that time forward was of a prevailing gospel, that there would be this gathering of Gentiles and believing Jews that would come from all corners, so to speak, or from one end of heaven to the other. And now it begins to make sense in Matthew 24:32 when he says, "Learn the parable from the fig tree, that when its branch has already become tender, put forth its leaves, you know that summer is near. Even so, you too, when you see all these things, rejoice that he is near, right at the door." So this doesn't have anything to do necessarily, the postmillennialists would say, with the creation of Israel as a nation, but it has everything to do with the preceding time period up to the destruction of Jerusalem, with regards to knowing that that's the coming of the Lord and when the gospel will begin to take off and begin to prevail in the earth. Now we understand, I hear that singing over there, it's just, all right. Now, I just mentioned here by way of this generation, just to go back to that concept of this generation, that a lot of times what the dispensational writers will do is instead of, if they're feeling pinned with regards to Jesus' literalism, with regards to his looking at the disciples, saying this generation, meaning you guys that I'm talking to, and not this generation that will actually, be futuristic, is sometimes they'll refer to the genio, which is the word that is used there, as race and not generation. In other words, that these Jews who see these things will be the ones that will be a part of the end times and the coming of the Lord. Again, when we're playing around with translation, it ends up being an interesting discussion because everybody comes to it with their lenses again, and how that's interpreted. So anyway, we'll leave it at that. I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to wrap there tonight because we're getting to rapture fever. So I'm probably going to pick up next time on the rapture fever stuff. So this is a good place to stop with regards to that. And I know we got off the beaten path, but at least we got some application to cultural engagement here. So that's a part of the class. So I don't feel too bad having to tarry too much time in Matthew 24. But again, all of this is, your theology. I like what Keith Tusey says. He says we're all victims of our theology. And he means that in a good way. That whatever you ultimately believe, you'll ultimately live. And you may say you believe one way, but what you actually believe is what's going to be manifested in how we do life. I think I could also say that we're victims of our eschatology. And however we sort of define that, whether it's subconsciously or not, it's going to affect how we begin to engage in our world before us. And again, it would be great if we got pulled out of here, and I'm looking at my grandson, and I think about the world that he's going to be left with, and we're going to anyway. We're going to be indicted as a Christian generation if we don't have an awakening soon. And I'm going to go back to that phone call real quick. One of the questions when we were having the phone call with the Alliance in Indiana, and I was listening to all that was going on, and they were talking about not being sure about whether we'd hear, the rebuke was well written and that we think it's good, but I don't know if it should be given. And so we were going through that whole conversation, and one of the things that I did say and I left with those guys on the phone, I said, listen, you guys are the same ones, and I've heard this not from your council, but I hear it from the South Carolina Palmetto Family Council, that you guys stand up and publicly you get teed off that pastors are not involved. You run around and you bemoan the fact that you can't get pastors involved. Now you got pastors involved, and you want to tie one arm behind our back. You want to nuance our words. You want to make sure that the thing is crafted just perfectly so nobody gets offended. And it ends up being the same problem we're having in our culture. And so it seems to me that if the Indiana, we call it the Indiana, it wasn't the Indiana fix, it was called the Indiana fiasco. That's what we're calling it now. Or the Indiana farce, that's another one we could call it. And, the deal is that, pastors, you want pastors to be involved, but here's the awakening. This is what I was getting to. This is the awakening we need. The awakening we need is not that pastors get revived and awakened to a cultural setting. It's not just that the church needs awakened to what's going on around them, but it sounds to me like the voices of conservative Christians who are working in the political fields need their epiphany that those who call themselves your friends and Christians aren't. And until we start calling it straight, it isn't going to change. Because we put them in office, and then as soon as we put them in office, they throw us under the bus, and then we sit on phone calls wondering how not to offend them. So, to me, the prophetic nature of pastors is, I don't care if they're Republican or Democrat. I can't answer for what you do policy-wise, but this much we know. And Governor Pence may be a great guy on a normal situation, but on that Thursday he signed that bill, he threw us all under the bus. And not only that, I said, I can tell you the pastors of South Carolina are mad at him because he was the firewall, and now we're going to have to fight an even more fierce battle as they come to us because they got a victory under their belt. So now you left that with us. And that's how we feel. Well, you see, and it's even hard because it gets quiet, and these guys are your friends, and they get quiet on the phone. Because you're having to say things to people that have been out there fighting, saying, why don't you? That's the awakening. And the awakening is we've got to start seeing things as they really are, and being able not to speak unkindly or unlovingly, but truth can be lovingly applied, but it may not feel good.
Part of the problem is Research Council, that's their livelihood.
Exactly.
So they're tied to, if we're not having to fight battles, we're not getting paid. Whereas you guys are doing this not because you're getting paid to do this. You're doing this because your church, your community, your people.
We've lost the vision of what the end game is. We've lost the vision of the goal. It's not. This is not to be perpetual ministry here. This is to end.
There will always be evils to fight.
Sure.
And evils to face them. So.
And they'll always be. And as long as we're giving birth to children, there'll always be souls to save.
Right.
And I mean, this is not going to stop at all. And as long as they're carnal hearts, there's going to be challenges with which we all face. And again, politics and laws do not make people righteous. They do not. They're a reflection of our carnal heart. But they are a teacher. And right now we're being taught all the wrong things. So anyway, that was the last little bit, and then we'll wrap. So, all right, any last interaction or question you had? I think at least tonight I feel good that we kind of dealt with cultural engagement and eschatology a little bit. So I feel a little bit better about that. All right. All right, guys, appreciate you being on the journey. So we'll wrap it and say thank you and let you go home and have a great evening. Tell me who won the Masters then.